On average, it costs 5 or 6 times more to acquire a new customer than to keep an existing one. If you're driving acquisition and getting leads, but then you have a high churn rate, you have a very leaky funnel, it's not sustainable.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Now, growth doesn't happen by accident. It's engineered through strategy, execution, and data. In this episode, Brad Schlachter, Fractional CMO with the Growth Syndicate and full funnel growth strategist, shares how B2B and tech companies can align acquisition, analytics, and retention to achieve measurable, sustainable results. With experience scaling global brands like Microsoft, Intel, and Qualcomm, as well as high-growth startups, Brad reveals how to build go-to-market systems that fuel predictable growth. Brad, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Brad, maybe you can share a little bit more about your background. What brought you to helping business leaders achieve great success with their marketing now?
It really starts with always being a marketer started with me being very curious about behavior. I was a psych major in college, which marketing is really about consumer behavior. So it was always an area of interest for me. And also, at the end of the day, marketing is really about solving problems. How do you grow this brand? How do you pivot when clearly there's a change needed in the direction, And so really the solving the problems, understanding human behavior has led me to have a career in marketing. As you said, I've worked for some bigger companies, mostly early in my career. More recently, I've worked for more small and medium-sized businesses as a fractional CMO.
Awesome. I love what you said about the psychology part. We recently kind of saw this in business, in our own business with our recruiting. We deployed a chat bot to help with the first stage of interviews. And we saw like the submission process and rate drop. And we brought back the old form, but simplified it and then just gave an automatic email saying, hey, please apply here. We like your resume. And then the rates jumped up again. So I'm sure you've seen some similar kind of maybe less than intuitive results with marketing that you could to share with us that kind of give people an example of what that means about the human psychology in marketing.
I mean, it's definitely very true. I mean, it's not just what you say, but it's important on how you make your customers feel. And that's the brand side of marketing. And it's not just about the rational benefits. It's about, does the brand or does it resonate with someone on an emotional level? And that whole psychology aspect is really important. And sometimes, people don't pay enough attention to that aspect of marketing.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people think that marketing success is really about just generating more leads, having a bigger ad budget. How do you define sustainable growth from a marketing perspective?
The first thing that I always try to understand when I come in and I start as a fractional CMO is you really want to get alignment on what the business goals are. What does success equal? Because what's success for one company may be different than what's success for another company, depending on the business model, what stage the company's in. So I think, defining success is the first important thing. And then building a marketing plan around, okay, this is where we are now. This is where we want to be. And this is how we're going to get there. But ultimately, it's also about having a sustainable model so that that at the end of the day, you can build something that you can replicate. And if you're going to spend $1, you're going to get back $2 or $3 in revenue. And you can count on that and building that model that is consistent.
Now, when you're talking to these companies and kind of helping them build out these growth strategies, what are some of the most common gaps that you tend to find? Whether it's in the strategy itself or maybe in the mindset of the leadership team you're working on?
I talked about this a little bit before, but I think, one gap is performance marketing and brand. A lot of startups, a lot of early stage companies are very focused on leads and rightly so, but they sometimes will put too much emphasis on acquiring leads and the performance marketing aspect. And they won't take the time and energy to really make sure there's a true product market fit. Does the brand or does the product or service, resonate with the target audience or their ideal customer profile? Really understanding what's different and better or special about their product or service, because these are short term. But if you have performance marketing and brand alignment, your customer acquisition cost is going to go down, retention is going to go up, and you're going to be setting yourself up for long-term success.
You kind of mentioned some of this, like the connecting the customer acquisition with the analytics and increasing retention. Why is having that alignment so critical to the long-term success of a company?
Another common thing that I see for many companies that I work with is, they're very focused on leads and performance marketing. And yes, that's a big aspect of what a marketing needs to do, but they don't spend as much time or as much energy on the retention aspect. And, on average, it costs 5 or 6 times more to acquire a new customer than to keep an existing one. And I can tell you, especially for SaaS services or, subscription-based services, reducing churn or increasing retention is really critical in terms of driving long-term growth and doing it profitably. Because if you're driving acquisition and getting leads, but then you have a high churn rate, then you're just, you have a very leaky funnel and, and it's going to be, it's not sustainable. So,
Yeah.
I would say a common mistake that come from many companies that I've been working with is not putting the equal attention on the retention aspect versus acquisition. And retention is about understanding your customer, keeping them engaged, making sure there's a strong product market fit, and you're solving problems for your customer, and keeping them happy.
Sounds like there's a lot of overlap in the considerations that go into the outreach from both the acquisition and the retention side. Are there any other tips, strategies, tools that you typically recommend or enjoy working with for helping on that retention side so that they are keeping those customers once they acquire them?
It's really about understanding your customer, having that customer first mentality. If you have a subscription service or really any service, you need to be doing market research. You need to be talking to your customers. If someone cancels, you need to have some type of exit survey. You need to understand why people are signing up, but just as importantly, if they're leaving, why are they leaving? And, there's active churn, people who are deciding to cancel, and usually will give you a reason. Maybe your product doesn't meet their needs, or they no longer need your product or your service. But then sometimes companies forget about the passive churn, which is people who are falling off because their credit card was declined or some type of, payment issue. And there are things you can do to help mitigate that type of churn as well. And so you just, again, if you have a comprehensive, plan where once you acquire a customer, you view that as just the start, then it's about keeping them engaged. And then if they do drop off, understanding why and how can you potentially get them back.
Those are awesome ideas. And one thing that we've noticed from the Workergenics side, many of our clients employ their executive assistants through our service to be that client care point of contact so they can lead those initiatives. Because often people don't think of them as like the revenue generating activities where the founders and leaders need to be spending all their time. So it's a great opportunity to bring in an affordable executive assistant to lead those initiatives and lower that turnover so your marketing dollars have a higher ROI. Another question for you. You've worked with other major brands and you've led growth initiatives that have achieved major turnarounds and exits for them. I'm curious, what's one campaign or pivot that really changed the trajectory of a business that you worked with?
I think I could speak to some specific campaigns, but I also think it's partly a mindset. When I was at Hallmark, I like to use an example of we had a partnership with Roku and I helped launch Hallmark streaming service, which is now called Hallmark Plus. This was the early days and we still hadn't really found our devices or what platforms were going to be successful for growing the service. And Roku turned out to be the first platform where we saw a lot of success, in part because it was an easier to use device. The audience was a little bit older, was a little bit more female, which aligned with Hallmark's demographics, and Roku's demographics had a pretty good match. And ultimately we ran an ad for a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie that had Betty White in it. And she kind of like touched all the different quadrants. So like young people loved her, older people loved her. She just sort of was, our magic, piece of creative. And so, we sort of found like everyone needs to sort of find their Betty White, what's the type of content and image and that's going to resonate and appeals across different quadrants and kind of is something that you can really leverage. So that was, one example where Roku ended up driving a lot of the success early on for the Hallmark streaming service. And Betty White was like our poster child for reaching our audience. But taking a step back, I think it's also just really important for people, marketing teams, to focus on trying to do just two or three big things instead of like 100 disconnected things. And more specifically, if I use Hallmark as an example, doing a big push when a new Betty White movie's put on the service, or there's some new product update, or there's some trade show or consumer event happening, maybe it's Mother's Day or for the holidays, and finding those multiple levers you can pull simultaneously, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck versus trying to do 100 little things.
If you're running a growing company and still handling too many operational details yourself, there's a better way forward. The Delegate or Die checklist shows you the exact tasks that drain leadership bandwidth and the simple changes that recover 15 to 30 plus hours a week. Download it free at workergenics.com/scale-smart. Now let's get back to the episode. What advice or tips or strategies would you share with the audience that maybe is in that position where they feel like they're doing all these different marketing initiatives, everything's all over the place? How would you kind of guide them down to focus on those top, most impactful activities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with taking a step back and realizing that, marketing can't be done in a silo. You have to coordinate and align with the product team, with the content team, with the dev team. And so you find these, I call them marketing pillars, or big things that you're going to do, the two or three big things you're going to do throughout the year. You need to sit down cross functionally and say, okay, there's going to be a new product update or new UI, new UX experience that's going to hit this time of year. Or if you have a content team, we're going to be adding a bunch of new content, around this time. And in particular, this one is really important. Looking at the calendar again, is there a conference or is it Mother's Day or something other type of event that can tie it all together? And then you come up with, okay, let's launch this big marketing campaign around this product update when this new content is dropping. It also provides a PR hook. And by the way, yes, it's also some holiday or Mother's Day or some event where maybe we tie in, limited time offer. It's by working cross-functionally and getting aligned and being able to pull those levers from multiple departments and tying it all together.
Now, going back to the Betty White example, I'm sure there was a lot of studying and analysis that went into choosing Betty White. And for maybe the business owner out there who is not in industry where they're necessarily going to bring in famous actors like that on their behalf, what are some other strategies they can use to like find their Betty White in relation to their ideal clients?
Ultimately, why Betty White worked for Hallmark was, yes, the ads that featured her had a high or pretty good click-through rate. And so people would notice her, they recognized her, they wanted to learn more. But they weren't the ads that had the highest click-through rate. We had other ads with other unknown actors or actresses that had maybe more provocative imagery, more eye-catching visuals. Those would have higher click-through rates. But the reason why Betty White worked is that she really was an example of a person who personified the Hallmark brand. And so having an image and content that really truly represents your brand, that's going to lead to the higher conversion rates. And when someone clicked on the Betty White ad and then they were taken to the Hallmark streaming service, it made sense, right? That person and that brand, are strongly aligned in terms of values and being wholesome. And so it's really about finding that, testing lots of different things and finding the content that's not only going to get people's attention, but once it gets people's attention, they're not going to feel like it's a bait and switch and that there's this consistent promise that you're delivering on the promise of the ad. And so that just really starts with understanding your customer and really testing and optimizing different things to see what works. Because before we had the Betty White ad, we had lots of other creative running, and again, some had much higher click-through rates but much lower conversion rates. And so it takes time to find the right mix.
So you bring up a good point of like looking at the data. There's a lot of data in marketing that people in the marketing team and leadership team might have to look through and sift through. And if they were just looking at performance of click-through rate, they may have said, hey, these ads over here are performing much better. Let's double down on those, and would have had a worse result in the end. How do you help people kind of sort through all the data that's out there today and help them really stay focused on the most important metrics?
Look, I mean, click through rate matters, right? I mean, you can't scale without having a decent click through rate. And click through rates show if an ad is standing out, which is half the battle, maybe even more than half the battle. But you can't let what I would call vanity metrics drive your business strategy. And ultimately, click through rate is great, but if your conversion rate is really low, it doesn't matter, right? You're wasting spend. So you really need to focus on the metrics that matter. So you have to look at the whole life cycle. So at Hallmark, it was a subscription service and there was a free trial. So, we looked at obviously click through rate, everything from the top of the funnel. You need to get people into the top of the funnel. But then what did they do after they clicked, right? And then did they sign up for a free trial, which was sort of like the first conversion? And then 2 weeks later, once the free trial ended, did they convert to a paying customer? And you really need to follow that journey from the start to the end so that you understand, okay, did this ad work? Not from a click through rate perspective, but did it drive new subscribers? And what was the customer acquisition cost for a free trial person to start with? And then what's the ultimate cost for a paying subscriber? And so you're optimizing for the right metrics, the metrics that are aligned with revenue and growth, not just top of funnel.
One topic I always like to hit on, especially when in the marketing space that is relatively new and everyone's is top of mind for people right now, is leveraging AI and automation marketing. How do you see these tools reshaping how teams execute, define, and measure their growth with when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it changes every day. I think everyone's using AI, and certainly it can save you and your team a lot of time and energy. And I think AI is really good for certain things in terms of analyzing data and helping with content creation. But you still want to have a human, looking at driving the overall strategy, understanding the customer, mapping out the high level strategies. And, AI is a great co-pilot. So I don't see AI, at least in the near term future, taking over that, but it keeps getting better every day. So you never know. But I think right now it's a great tool. Really what we're seeing now also is instead of just people using tools like Chat GPT, now AI agents are being set up. And so certainly a lot of things are getting automated by these agents. And again, usually things that are tasks that require a lot of data or analysis or things that are easy to automate. It's constantly evolving. And look, as marketers, we've all been using AI in one form or another for many years. I mean, a lot of the machine learning optimization that happens in paid media, all that is, as a form of AI. So, all the tools we're using have now AI sidekicks or AI, tools that are going to help you with the process.
So, for leaders that are listening and really want to take action in this last quarter of the year to have more predictable growth with their marketing, what's one action they can take to start turning things around and have their marketing be a true revenue driver for them?
Yeah, I think it's really about, in some ways, going back to the basics. Some marketers, they might have sort of like their go to market playbook and they use sort of the same assets or same targeting strategy, whether it's on LinkedIn or TikTok or whatever the channel is. Again, they're not basing everything on the customer, knowing the customer, understanding their pain points, understanding their journey. If you have a funnel that's long or maybe a complex product, where are people dropping off? Why are people dropping off? Again, don't just focus, as I said before, on the acquisition side. You need to also have a holistic view and focus on the retention side. And I think if you have that customer first mindset, you make sure that you're not just focusing on acquisition, but you're also focusing on having a brand that's aligned with your performance marketing. And you're also paying attention to engagement and retention. And then lastly, as I said, doing 2 or 3 big things instead of 100 small things. I think if you follow that sort of basic template, you're going to position yourself for long-term and sustainable growth.
Absolutely. Understanding your customer and having real clear focus is definitely some great advice for everybody listening today. So,
Yeah.
Brad, those that want to learn more, have a continued conversation with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn and it's Brad Schlachter and I'm with the Growth Syndicate. So feel free to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. For those of you watching, if you got value today, hit the follow or subscribe button at the top and leave that star or like for us. Every rating helps us reach more business leaders that want to grow the smart way, just like you. And maybe you know a business owner or a colleague who could use this information. Go ahead and share this episode with them. It could be exactly what they need right now. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you all on the next one.